Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation about product certifications. We're going to be talking today about designing education technology in ways that support learning, and what are the signals that we can create to help there be more transparency in the EdTech marketplace. So I think that I'd like to just jump right in and talk a little bit about, what are some of the challenges that arise when trying to select education technology currently? Anyone can
well, speaking as an investor in a number of K-12 technology companies, procurement in this country is a mess. It's, there are 14,000 plus district-like entities, and each of them runs their own procurement processes, which is kind of insane. At the same time, nobody wants a situation where some sort of state level or national level body says, this particular product is the right one, and enshrines, I don't know, maybe an outdated, mediocre choice as the thing you have to buy. So, certification needs to have some connection to procurement. It needs to be a procurement enabler, and then vendors will do it. But it can't be picking favorites in a way that results in mediocre incumbents enforcing their barrier to entry.
I would just say, speaking as a superintendent, it's just hard to keep up, right? So how do you, and which is exactly the point of this conversation, how do you separate that which can be really useful to you and meet a need that you have from all of the noise that is out there? And we are inundated with noise. The prior panel was talking about the number of emails. My delete game is strong, people, so just know, I will hit delete in a hot minute. But I do think it's making sense of that, and I think as superintendents, we really look, and where I think the certification conversation is interesting, we really look to one another, right, for, I think, validation, more than external entities.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I look at the diversity of learners, and I think about who actually develop the products that are going into the schools, and how does that look different from the learners that are using the tools. And I think that that's a huge issue in where product certifications can play a part, but where ecosystem conversations can play a part, where partnerships between school districts can play a part, because we're in a world where every learner is different, and that's just getting more and more diverse, and the needs of students vary so greatly. And so I think tech products are often designing with only a very small subset of students in mind, and that, to me, I think is a huge problem, and a big problem that comes in to the procurement process when you're making decisions about what technology you're going to acquire and how that's actually going to serve the students that are a part of your school.
I can give a very specific example from my own history of the kind of certification that would be very useful. So I was an investor in one company that had some really first-rate software engineers, and they also they had a product that went viral very early, and so they had to engage the full range of hardware that was out there in the real world. And meanwhile, several of their peers, built products that were designed to run basically on the machines they were using for their engineering, like the latest version of the Windows browser, not the one from 5 years ago. And so they built products that literally would not run on the majority of computers in school districts in this country. And so that there's some kinds of certification that might be, playing favorites or subjective. But the question of whether the software can run on your devices or integrate with your other systems is a very, bright line distinction. So that would be one thing I would definitely focus on.
So this makes me think that it might be helpful to for folks to have a sense of what we mean when we talk about product certifications. And so this is something that is evolving in many areas of the EdTech marketplace, where there's a desire to create certifications related to things like data interoperability, if you're familiar with Project Unicorn, or related to privacy, student data privacy, that kind of thing. Digital Promise has created 2 certifications to date that are focused on the use of research in in product design, but it seems like there are opportunities to create other kinds of certifications that could be really meaningful to those who are in the role of procurement. Could we talk a little bit about maybe some of the needs that still continue to exist in terms of surfacing information about products? What do you need to know?
The least amount possible in order to be smart and effective. I'm being serious, and I actually, in our conversation prior to this, we talked about it. I think as a superintendent, having a certification that signals something to me, right? That signals quality. We talked about the equivalent of a good housekeeping seal of approval. Now, you could dig down into what that certification really means, what it entails. And I think that having both available is the right one, but I think most district leaders are going to look for something that's quick because we just don't have time to read through 8 pages of why.
Yeah, another thing we talked about is the critical importance of recommendations from peers. And, the fact that, people want to see positive references from superintendents who manage districts that are similar to their own, similar in size, in the same state, dealing with the same state standards, rural like theirs or urban like theirs. And the question is, how do you incorporate that, the subjective or the recommendations, into some sort of certification or product information repository? And we talked about the question of whether it could be open or whether it had to be sort of available. I mean, obviously, if you try to blind it, some friendly superintendent will leak it to the vendor eventually. But at least it's not out there in public, right? It's supposed to be only accessible to other superintendents. That kind of thing might result in a higher level of honesty. Or, we said you could just focus on the positive. Like, I'm willing to testify that this product really worked in my district, and my district has these characteristics, and if you want to talk about it with me, I am open to that. And right now, there is no sort of platform nationwide for creating these conversations and connections. And actually, now that I don't think I said this last time, but it just seems completely obvious that Digital Promise should be doing that.
Well, I think that as we've learned more about the EdTech marketplace at Digital Promise over the last several years, we've thought about how to connect districts to resources to pilot EdTech tools, and we've thought about how to create resources for EdTech products, to think differently about what's needed in the marketplace. And one of the things that we have tried to prioritize is that evidence and research be kind of the foundation to all of these things. And I wonder if maybe what you're pointing to is that this is kind of a both and. We need something to limit the choices from, 20,000 to 10, and then you need the next level of vetting, which might be turning to a phone a friend kind of resource to narrow that field even down to 2 or 3 that you're willing to pilot. I wonder about equity and the role that, the opportunity that product certifications potentially have to ensure that products are designed and developed with equity in mind, and whether that's an opportunity.
That's actually one of our guiding principles when we go into this work. So my team actually has equity at the forefront when we're making these decisions. And to Madison's point, this notion of and to actually Matt's point as well, I need to know that your service, your product is going to work with my population, right? And I have a richly diverse population. And I want to say one other thing too, that I don't think we talk a lot about. It's not just about does the product or service, is it equitable in how we implement? Are you as a company, do you have equity as one of your founding principles? And it matters to me. I don't want to, I look at when we enter into a relationship with a provider, it has to be a partnership, right? And God bless my team in Highline, they think they're extra special. And so we are not interested in what you do. We are interested in what you can help us do for children. And we will push you and make you do things differently if what you are offering on the surface is not exactly what we need. We will make you tweak it. But it's also, I know we're recording. I don't want to work with a-holes. You know, I mean, I want to work with good people who share our commitment to serving all children and to creating truly equitable school systems. And you need to be about that. So it's not just about how good what you do is, it's how good you are. And do you walk your talk?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think it's impossible for a team that is not diverse to make good decisions about how to serve diverse populations. You know, my firm has been on a learning journey in that respect, although that was, you know, something we believed since the start. It's really working. You know, in our latest fund, we have 22 portfolio companies. 6 of them are run by Black CEOs, and 1 is run by a Latino CEO. You know, I'd like to see anyone else match that. And that you know, I guess the point that I want to make to people in the investment world is that does not involve any sort of compromise of quality. That involves an increased chance of success, because the reason why most startups fail is most people use the phrase failure of product market fit, but you could also describe it as a failure of empathy, right? You don't really understand who your customer is. It's kind of astonishing how few startups have someone who has any experience in administration on board. There's always a teacher, but not necessarily an administrator. And then, you know, there's also this question about what does it feel like to the families, and I use the example in another panel in the same room, so I'm sorry, you know, about those of you who heard that, but already. But you know, sometimes the research will say this questionnaire is effective, right? You administer this questionnaire, and you can figure out what kind of truancy intervention to do. But it won't necessarily tell you, because it wasn't in the research design, that families feel humiliated and singled out when they're forced to fill out this questionnaire. So, you know, for our company all here to say, we're just going to administer this questionnaire to everyone at the start of the semester and not make it feel like a punishment or a shaming of those whose children are truant, changes the way the whole thing feels to people, and yet that would not have been picked up in the conventional research design with an RCT.
I think there's really so many levels to it. I mean, I could talk about this forever, and my co-founders in the audience today, but we really look very specifically as what is happening with racial equity in EdTech products. And we're even looking at the artificial intelligence level, which is a huge perpetuation of harms when it comes to racial bias and all those things. We'll be talking about that later at a panel, but I think making it really easy for district leaders to understand what is happening inside the black box is very important to us. When you come into the procurement conversations, the school district should be coming in a position of power, right? We want to understand what decisions this software is making for our students and why those proxies were chosen for those decisions, whether that's in artificial intelligence or just in the content itself. I think you made a comment about first-rate engineers, and I'm like, well, a first-rate engineer is only a first-rate engineer if they've been in the classroom, they're building products for black students. Have they been in the classroom as first-rate engineers with black students? If they haven't, then they're not first-rate engineers, in my opinion. So I think really thinking very intentionally, if you're in the technology department, you're developing EdTech products, are you really simply asking the question, if this product is going to go through in K through 12 public schools, am I building and solving problems for students of color? Because if I'm not, this product is a flop, in my opinion. So I really think that, I think other people would say that as well, but I think that is a big revolution and change that has to happen in the technology industry, that has to happen in the venture capital industry, and really making it easy for school districts to understand the importance of that. And I think one other note I want to add is focusing it on black students and Latinx students and black and Latinx students that are low income, right? We're not trying to solve, when we solve for those students, we solve for all students. And I think that that's something that we're sort of breaking down as a conversation. We're really getting to the point of making it a particular point that we're wanting to look at the problems that these students are facing and solve for them. And technology is not the answer to everything, right? There has to be, it's in partnership with the school districts and the teachers and the communities and the families. Do they have agency over understanding what the technology is doing in the classroom, but also what that technology is doing in the communities itself, right? As the students learn in the classroom, they take that knowledge out into the world, right? And they spread it to other people in their community. So I think it's really important for us to really highlight what's going on and expose it and really get down to the specifics on what are we doing to mitigate those problems and how are we looking for solutions where we can put it into a certification process that helps products start certification is not an all, hey, we took this kind of certification, we're no longer a racist company. Sorry, that's not how it works, but I think it's just a step in the right direction instead of this kind of world that we're in now, that this ever-evolving circle of, well, how do we solve for equity? It's so hard. Well, of course it's hard, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it and that we can't do it. We must fight for that. And I think it's really exciting to know that we have leaders on both the school administration side and the VC side that care about that and are pushing it forward in their institutions as well.
Yeah. The same is true for special needs kids. I mean, ultimately, one way to say what I'm trying to achieve is that everyone should have an IEP, and everyone should be, the assumption should be, you are meant to succeed. We're not going to inflict grades on you and tell you suck. We're going to start off with the assumption that you are special and you deserve to be treated with respect and not given negative messages all the time. Even the most able students are experiencing some really wounding messages from the system as currently constituted.
Well, I'm glad that we got to the students and talking about students, because I think that that's that's why we're here, and we want to think about how we're including student voice in certifications as well. It seems like there are kind of two sides of the equation. There's the demand side and what procurement officials need to make decisions with, bombarded with lots of information and try to pare that down. But there's also the messaging that setting criteria through a product certification sends to products about what matters. And so could you all talk a little bit about who should be involved in defining what those criteria are?
So I guess it might be really tricky to incorporate students into a certification process, and that's one reason why I don't, I've been involved in the creation of some social impact standards, and when they try to quantify, they often screen out the things that are most important, but also they sort of tend towards optimization of the current system. Like I would regard my companies as failures if they just help tweak aspects of the current system. I want them to teach people a different way to behave, to nudge them towards a kinder and more inclusive way of schooling people.
So I actually tend to agree with Matt that I don't know how they are involved in the actual certification process, but they should be absolutely informing, right, that process. So, hearing from our students what they need, what works, what doesn't, and I'm as guilty as the next person of making decisions that I think are good for students without asking, right? We do it all the time, every day. So the more that we can start with the kids, I think the better off whatever certification process we come up with will be. If it's really driven, and to Madison's point, really is solving for the problems that we know are persisting in our system, rather than, just de facto perpetuating them.
Yeah. Score on the math exam, right? If that's your endpoint, then, that's the current system. If the question is also, how would the students rate the experience of going through this course? Were they given autonomy to choose a project that was meaningful to them? I think it's possible to design a certification process that starts to address questions like that, but that's definitely not the way certifications work today.
Yeah, and I think about how, certification processes can be in partnership with other external entities that are doing a lot of that, speaking with students, understanding student populations, bringing the problems in from students, and then infusing that into the ways that they're thinking about designing and developing the certification. But I think at the very lowest level, we all have logical assumptions, we all have biases. How are we just taking a second to stop and say, what does this do to a student, period? At certification, development of a tech product, a curriculum, somebody that's going to come in and speak to the students, have we just even taken 1 second to really ask ourselves, how will the students be affected by this? And more importantly, have we put in the checks and balances in place to create a system where they can give us that feedback, and then we're taking that feedback and working it into the process? And I really do think that bringing students into the certification process is actually a really cool a way to think. I think about even for our certification and how there's so many areas where students of color could come in and give feedback on the content that they're experiencing within a system, the way that they felt when some decision engine that they now have agency over understanding prompted out something to them, and they could say, oh, I thought it was weird when the AI told me this, and I thought thought it was going to say it this way, right? Or I didn't understand the culturally unrelevant way that this artificial intelligence system gave me a response, right? And also thinking so much about the way that you actually mitigate harms in technology is through feedback loops, right? What are students saying as they're working with the software? How are they perceiving that in their experience in the classroom, but also just in their cultural experience in general? And so I really think there's lots of ways that we can think outside of the box, to Matt's point, and extend beyond what the current system is. Because this current system is rid with systemic issues and bias issues already. So if we continue to build on top of that system, we just only perpetuate what already exists.
Yeah, I think that's so important that in the product certification design process, we have to be thinking about all of these components as well, or else we'll just end up signaling that, you know, the products that are, you know, most relevant are really just perpetuating bias and racism. So one of the things that we've been thinking about at Digital Promise in creating a product certification process is how do we really have users at the center of the process as well in defining the criteria, hearing from teachers, from administrators, from learners, from parents, and then how do we actually think of the certification as a mechanism for that feedback loop to products about what consumers care about. I think that as much as we've been kind of in this world of thinking about what the competencies are that we want products to be displaying, we're also not naive that product certifications are going to solve everything. So I'd love to talk a little bit about like what inequities do product certifications not solve for? Like what else do we still need in the way of information in the EdTech marketplace that isn't going to show up in a product certification?
Well, the schools are being asked to take on an absurd burden. I remember one principal in Newark who discovered that one of the reasons for truancy was that some students did not have access to laundry machines. Their parents didn't have the money to launder their clothes, and they didn't want to show up to school stinky. So he had to install laundry machines in the basement of the high school. We're asking schools to make up. There's only so much EdTech can do to promote equity, and if kids don't have a home or reliable bandwidth, I think bandwidth should be a basic human right at this point. Like, how are you preparing them for life in the 21st century if they don't have it? There aren't very many tools out there that can address the largest problems, which are so fundamental, unfortunately. And optimizing EdTech is, just not very, basal in the Maslow hierarchy.
Yeah, I would say just get out into the community and build relationships. It's a really hard thing to do, right? It's a hard thing to on the technology side, if you think about tech companies typically build and design and develop EdTech in a vacuum, right? And that's technology across the board, right? That's not just EdTech. We've still got corporate tech companies building cameras that don't work on faces like mine because they were only tested on white male faces in the design and development process. But that is a result of not thinking community first and family first and student first. And I think a lot of the ways that we even start to bridge the gap between what is actually happening on the ground and how technology can, in any form or fashion, solve those issues is for people to get out of this really shiny world of technology and literally find themselves in the communities, right? Go and into the community centers, go and try. I want to see tech products that are going into community centers in low-income, inner-city neighborhoods and trying to look at the problems that are happening and thinking about then creating technology from those perspectives, not from some, white, shiny office where they don't really understand. They're sort of predicting what they think the problems are. So I think, and really trying to facilitate how you help school leaders, I'd love to hear Dr. Susan's comment on this, but I think a lot about how do you make it easier for school leaders and administrators to connect with students and families as well? And are there technology solutions for that? Because I really think that that's where, less about what is happening in the classroom, right? But more about how are the feedback loops between the schools and the communities actually being facilitated and helped equitably by technology?
Yeah, I want to just emphasize, what Matt said about sort of basic needs. When we had to close our schools in 2020, my first priority was food. How am I going to feed my kids? Because 7 out of 10 of my kids come to school every day relying on us for their meals, and now all of a sudden school is going to be closed. So job one was food, right? Then job number 2 was they've got to have a device at home and they've got to have internet. And I know this isn't germane exactly the certification, but I'm going to get it in here because I vowed to get this comment in every panel I'm on while I'm here. The talent and money that is in this building right now today, that we are going to now go back and take broadband access away from children in their homes that we've given them, is obscene. We've got to solve for this.
It's disrespectful, honestly.
I mean, it really is unconscionable. And so I think that we're in this really fascinating time in education where, yes, we are focusing on the basic needs of children and families, like grocery. We had to provide families with grocery gift cards. You know what I mean? Like it was, all of that. And now living in this space where students are learning virtually, right? That we have to rely on technology, and we want to get smarter, and we want to know what's going on. It's this very, very interesting, I think, balance that we have at this moment in time with school systems.
Yeah, none of this is to indict, the idea of standards for EdTech products, but standards do sort of define the box. So I was talking to one of our entrepreneurs earlier today about kids from 0 to 3. Right, in a European nation, there are government agencies that take responsibility for what is happening to those kids and those families. Here, not at all. So, should it be part of a school district's mission to start working with those families before they ever enter school in those, incredibly critical years? So the idea of a company expanding the frame or doing things beyond what was being requisitioned or whatever isn't captured in a conventional standards process. And I'm not sure it should be captured in a certification process, but it definitely needs to be, it needs to be encouraged and funded when you find it.
And I want to also speak to Madison's point around engaging families, communities. We have both, I think, an opportunity and a real risk with the ESSER dollars that we have right now, right? So I know everybody thinks that districts are flush with cash, right, because we have all these ESSER dollars. And it is true. We're with the 3 rounds of ESSER, we're going to have $80 million in Highline. I can tell you it's already accounted for, so don't come hit me up for something else we want to do. But one of the things, though, that we decided to do, because rarely, and I don't know we'll ever get this opportunity again, where we really do have money that is not totally encumbered, right, and doesn't have a lot of strings. So rarely can we go out genuinely, authentically to our families, to our community, and say, how do you want to spend it? Because money in public education is in different colors, right? You can spend this, and most people don't get that, right? So we set aside, I want to say 3%, 3 to 5% of our total ESSER dollars for a community fund that we're putting together a group of folks in the community. How do you want to spend it? Like we're giving you the checkbook, right? Like, what do you think we need to be doing? And it will be interesting to see what they come back with, right? And how much of it might be technology related and how much of it might not be. But it's an opportunity that we haven't had, and I don't think we'll get again.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about technology is that it's very inexpensive relative to like giving people a house, or so if it can be impactful.
And by the way, under the heading of Never Waste a Good Crisis, so we were supposed to run a school bond last fall, and there was no way we could run a $400 million school bond with the economy the way it was. But we ran a tech levy, right? Because we're like, you know what? We think the community now, so all those people that would come to my school board meetings and rail against the fact that we were spending money on technology for other people's kids, while they then sat in the audience on their iPhone the rest of the time. So it's like technology is fine for them and their family, but how dare the districts spend money in equipping every child with technology? Well, that argument's out the window now. So we passed the tech levy at the highest margin we'd ever passed anything before, because I do think there's a recognition. Because we had, my colleague Marlon in the prior panel was talking about, does the district have a commitment around that, technology is important? Yes, but does your community? Right? So we had folks, there was a lot of pushback on technology in the schools where I was, right? And we're in outside Seattle. And, part of that was, well, it's too much. Well, now it's a given. It has to be a given, right, in the world we're living in.
Yeah, I think that you brought us back to something that I'd love to end on, which is that there is this moment of kind of harnessing the power of technology to change the way that we think about learning. And there is a need for more information about what's worth investing at a high level in. And so as we kind of think about where the marketplace is going and the role that certifications can and should play, what's on your mind? What are you hopeful for?
So one thing I do want to say, and we talked about this in our pre-conversation, and this goes for those in the EdTech space and for school systems. This infusion of federal money that we have is great, and it's one-time money, and in 3 years it'll be gone. And if we can't show some meaningful change in the learning experience for our children and how they're doing, the public will lose it, and rightfully so. And guess what? They're going to lose it mostly at schools, but but you will be affected, because if you're not helping us be successful, I'm not going to partner with you, and you're not going to get a contract with me. So I think we all have a vested interest right now in getting this certification right, in getting this right, and in getting this learning experience for kids better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say really focusing on developing certifications that bring a signal to the market that is new and that is pushing against the edges, right? Yeah. To come out and have a certification for racial equity, to say that our product took all of the sort of checks and balances that we could from an engineering standpoint to understand how our product would affect Black and brown students in public schools. No product is really doing that across the board right now, but they're going to have to Dr. Susan's point, like, you're not going to get partnerships with school districts if you don't solve for problems that those learners have. And so I think really trying to think outside of the box, for not how do we create certifications to just continue to sustain what we have now, but how do we develop certifications that help signal to the market what changes must come and need to come in order for us to shift our entire livelihood forward, right? This is about humanity, and the students are our future, right? They are our story. And if we don't create a way to write that story in an equitable and inclusive way, then we will continue to just perpetuate the white supremacy system that many of these institutions operate on.
I think we need to end it there, Madison. But I will offer just a kind of final word if folks want to share about, Madison, you've referenced several times the EdTech Equity Project and the certification that you're developing, but if you want to share a little bit more specifically about that and how to get involved, I think that folks might be interested.
Yeah, definitely. So you can look at a lot of our resources at edtechequity.org. Nidhi and I, we spent some time before the pandemic in 2020, which is really odd to think that we had 3 months of no pandemic and then it hit like in March. But we came together at the Aspen Institute and developed both resources for engineers and edtech companies to think about racial bias, specifically in artificial intelligence, in the design and development of edtech products. And then we created procurement guidelines for school districts to understand very easily, okay, how do we understand what's happening in these products, and what are the questions that we bring proactively to companies to understand how their technology solutions could be affecting students of color and diverse learners. And so we've been working in partnership with Digital Promise to create the really first ever racial equity certification for technology products in EdTech. We're really, really proud of it, and we're really excited to talk with a lot of companies about the need for this type of certification. I think another signal that I just want to speak to with Matt, in the VC fund, I mean, to be honest, when we started this work, it was really hard to get conversations going. I think school leaders understood, students and families obviously understood, but in the venture capital space, in the EdTech space, it was kind of like, oh, well, is this really a problem, right? And then George Floyd was murdered and everyone said, oh. And like the gift and the curse of that is that we're no longer going to be silent in that regard. I mean, we never were before that, but now we have champions behind us. So we're really honored to be working with Digital Promise and developing that certification, and really feel like it's going to be a major signal to the market, and encourage any EdTech products that are in the audience or here at the conference that you know about to connect with us and apply for the certification.
So my firm has a mission of lifting up the vulnerable and giving them a fighting chance at success in work, family, and civic engagement. And so there are a lot of products that are efficacious, but that widen rather than narrowing the gap because of the access problems. And so, it's something we have, interesting debates about. But there are certain companies that have a mission and a strategy that skews towards helping people who are more vulnerable inherently in a way that can't be compromised by any subsequent decisions. Like, for example, they're focused on children with special needs, or we have several companies that are focused on English language learners, right? So the mission is inherently to help those who are more vulnerable in one way or another. Not that every company we fund should be like that, but that's one sort of way to make the decision easy for us.
Yeah, those commitments are important, and I think that's in trying to create these product certification signals. We want to make more of these commitments public and available and well understood, so that they can be the beacons that are used for decision making to support.
I think it's like it's a money where your mouth is opportunity. I mean, everybody in this room knows the terms inclusion, diversity, equity, intersectionality are basically like branding terms for most technology companies at this point. But if you look at their staff and you look at their board and you look at all the people that are designing the technology, you're like, well, I don't see anything diverse, equitable, or inclusive about any of this, right? So this is really an opportunity for companies to say, okay, like this is where we're going to put major money resources behind engineering focus and changes, because we know what that will yield in the end. To Matt's point, having a black CEO for a tech company doesn't mean that the company is going to do worse, right? Like we're actually creating opportunities for companies to do better, because you have that diversity of thought and that diversity of focus. And so I really think zoning in on that is very important. And I will also just say that I think the term underestimated and underrepresented is better than vulnerable, because these communities, in my opinion, the communities that I come from, are not vulnerable communities, but we're communities that have been deemed and seen as not able to achieve. But we are far and beyond what folks believe that we are.
Thank you for that. And they heard you. They heard you. I love that, Madison. Thank you so much. Well, we are running out of time here, so thank you all for your participation on this panel and joining this discussion. And if folks have questions about the certification that Madison referenced, we have some information up here. All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.